The desert night was endless, a black ocean of quiet, interrupted only by the occasional rustle of the wind. Ava Ellis stood alone, the weight of her actions settling over her like the sand that covered the base. She had done it. She had taken down General Holden, the man who had once mocked her, dismissed her, and underestimated her at every turn. And now, as the stars above twinkled, marking the vast emptiness of the desert, Ava was finally free. But she didn't feel victorious. The battle had been won, yes, but the war was still unfolding. Ava turned away from the base, her mind on what she had just accomplished, but also on the unspoken truth that haunted her. Holden wasn't done with her. She could feel his presence lurking, his need for control gnawing at him like a beast that couldn't be tamed. He had lost everything, but men like him didn't let go so easily. His pride was broken, yes, but his hunger for power, his need to regain control, would never fade. The silence around her was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of machinery still running in the distance. Holden, her greatest adversary, the man who had used every tactic to break her, wasn't finished. She had taken everything from him, but in doing so, she had only ignited a fire that would burn even brighter, and he was coming for her. Inside the command center, the weight of defeat sat heavily on General Thomas Holden's chest. The base, once filled with the sharp sounds of military operations, now felt hollow. He sat at his desk, the edges of his fingers white with the grip of his anger. The reports from the Pentagon had hit him like a storm, and he could feel the walls closing in around him. He had been on top, a man in control, with the power to direct the flow of not just a program, but the lives of countless people. Now, he was nothing. The failure of the drones, the mockery of his leadership, the shame of Ava Ellis's victory, it had shattered him in ways he couldn't articulate. Ava had been more than just a consultant. She had been a force he could neither understand nor control. And in the end, that was his undoing. His once unshakable confidence had been replaced with doubt. The familiar feeling of being in control, of knowing every move before it was made, was gone. And Ava Ellis had taken it from him in the blink of an eye. She hadn't just solved the problem. She had exposed his weakness. And it hurt him in a way he couldn't describe. He thought back to their last confrontation, the moment when she had finally shown him who she really was. The quiet confidence, the resilience, the strength in her words. She had broken his spirit, and though she had walked away, he knew she had already won. Days passed, and the base seemed to move on without Ava, but there was no peace for her. Every corner she turned, every sound that reached her ears, made her feel the weight of Holden's lingering presence. His words echoed in her mind. This isn't over. She knew he was right. Ava's actions had been swift and precise. She had fixed what was broken, had saved the program, and yet she knew the true cost of victory. Holden's threats weren't empty. She could feel them, thick in the air. There would be no final, triumphant moment. No parade. No standing ovation. Just a lingering sense of dread, of waiting for the next blow to fall. And so, she prepared herself. Ava Ellis was not the same woman who had walked into the base months ago. She wasn't just a consultant, not just an outsider. She had become something else entirely, something stronger, more focused. She was a woman who had fought the hardest battle of her life and had come out on top. But she had also learned that, in a world like this, survival wasn't enough. The fight would continue. One night, as Ava walked through the base, the familiar sound of footsteps behind her made her stop. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Lieutenant Kai Jensen had followed her once again. But this time, there was a different look in his eyes. Respect, admiration, acknowledgement of what she had done. "I never thought you'd be the one," he said softly. "You've done more than any of us expected. You saved everything." Ava didn't respond immediately. The weight of his words hung in the air, and she felt the full force of the shift in their dynamic. She had earned his respect, But it didn't mean much to her now. She had learned long ago that respect from others wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the strength inside her, the ability to keep moving, to keep fighting, even when the odds seemed impossible. "I didn't do it for you," she replied, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. "I did it for the mission, and for myself." Jensen nodded, understanding the depth of her words. There was no need to explain any further. They were no longer just two soldiers in a game of power and control. They were two people who had faced the reality of war, of survival, and who now stood on opposite sides of a battlefield neither of them had wanted to be part of. But even as Jensen stood there, Ava's thoughts were already shifting. Holden wasn't done. She could feel it. He was going to make one last attempt to reclaim his power, to prove that he was still the man in control. He couldn't accept losing. The idea of Ava, the outsider, the civilian being the one to defeat him, gnawed at his core. And so, it came. The final confrontation. A message came in, urgent, direct from Holden himself. "Meet me in the command center, now." Ava didn't hesitate. She had known this moment would come. The final test, the final clash between two people who had never understood each other but had come to respect the battle the other had fought. She had already won in so many ways, but Holden's refusal to accept defeat meant that they were both about to face the ultimate test of power. She arrived at the command center to find Holden standing there, his back to her, staring out the window. The tension in the room was palpable. "You've cost me everything," Holden said, his voice low but filled with emotion. "I've lost control, lost my career, and you think you've won, but you haven't. You'll never be able to stop me." Ava's gaze was steady as she stepped into the room. "You don't get it, Holden," she said, her voice soft but sharp. "I didn't win because I took something from you. I won because I understood what you couldn't. I didn't need control. I needed the courage to let go. That's why you'll never win." Holden's face twisted in anger. "You don't know anything. I'll always find a way to take back what's mine." But Ava wasn't listening anymore. The battle was over, and she had already won. She had taken down the man who thought he could control everything, and now she would walk away. As Ava turned to leave the room, she felt the weight of everything she had fought for, the losses, the victories, and the moments in between. Holden's defeat wasn't just his loss. It was the loss of a system that valued control over trust, power over humility. Ava had broken that system, and in doing so, she had proven that true strength wasn't about dominance. It was about resilience, understanding, and knowing when to step aside. She stepped into the night, the desert wind howling behind her, carrying the echoes of her victory into the vast emptiness. She was done proving herself. She was no longer the outsider. She had become the force that changed everything. And now, the future was hers. Subscribe to HeartTouch Chronicles. If you've been moved by Ava Ellis's story, the woman who defied the odds, who proved that real power comes from understanding and trust, then subscribe to HeartTouch Chronicles for more gripping, emotional tales of resilience, strength, and the human spirit. Ava's journey is just one of many stories we bring to you. Stay with us as we continue to share narratives that will touch your heart, challenge your perspectives, and leave you wanting more. Don't miss out on the next chapter. Subscribe now and join us for more stories that will make you think, feel, and come back for more.